The scream didn't belong in a building made of glass and power. It tore through the marble lobby of Blackwell Industries like something wild and broken. Executives froze mid-step. Assistants dropped tablets. Security guards turned their heads. And then everyone saw her. A tiny girl in a pale blue dress, hair tangled, knees scraped, tears streaking down her face. She wasn't running toward the elevators. She wasn't running toward the security desk. She was running toward the janitor. "Mr. Daniel," she cried, throwing herself into his legs. "They beat my mom, she's dying." The mop clattered to the floor. Daniel Carter, quiet, gray-haired, invisible Daniel, felt his heart stop. The little girl was Lily Blackwell, daughter of Ethan Blackwell, the CEO. Minutes earlier, the top floor of the building had been alive with tension. Ethan Blackwell was in the middle of a high-stakes board meeting. Investors were pressuring him over a merger that would triple the company's value. Voices were sharp, tempers were tighter. At the same time, in the penthouse apartment above the office floors, Ethan's wife, Grace Blackwell, was alone. Except she was. Two masked men had forced their way in, looking for confidential files they believed were hidden in the apartment. When Grace tried to stop them from entering Ethan's private study, they shoved her. She fell against the glass coffee table. Lily had seen everything. The blood, the shouting, her mother collapsing. And without thinking, the 8-year-old ran. She ran past the elevator, past the security office, because in her panic she didn't think about authority. She thought about safety. She thought about the only person in the entire building who always smiled at her, who once fixed her broken toy quietly while everyone else ignored her. Daniel. Back in the lobby, executives stared in disbelief. "Lily," one of them whispered. Daniel knelt, gripping her shoulders gently. "Slow down, sweetheart. Tell me what happened." "They hurt Mommy," she sobbed. "They're still there. She won't wake up." Security finally snapped into action. Phones came out. Alarms were whispered into radios. Ethan Blackwell stepped out of the elevator, just in time to hear the words. For a moment, the powerful CEO looked less like a titan of industry and more like a terrified husband. "What did you say?" Ethan demanded, rushing forward. Lily clung tighter to Daniel. "They're upstairs," she cried. "Mommy's not breathing right." Ethan turned to security. "Call the police. Lock down the building." But Daniel's face had gone pale in a different way. Not fear. Recognition. He looked at Lily's trembling hands, the way she described Grace's breathing, the timeline. He made a decision that would shock everyone in that lobby. "Mr. Blackwell," Daniel said firmly, standing straighter than anyone had ever seen him, "we don't have time to wait." Ethan stared at him, stunned by the tone. "You," Ethan scoffed, "this isn't your concern. Let security handle it." Daniel didn't flinch. "With respect, sir, if she's not breathing properly and there's internal bleeding, she may not survive 10 minutes. The lobby fell silent. "How would you know that?" one executive muttered. Daniel looked at Lily. Then at Ethan. "Because before I was a janitor," he said quietly, "I was a combat medic." The words hit harder than the scream. Daniel Carter had worked at Blackwell Industries for 7 years. Quiet, efficient, invisible. No one had ever asked about his past. No one had cared. Years ago, Daniel had served in overseas conflict zones. He had pulled soldiers out of burning vehicles, stopped bleeding with his bare hands, performed emergency procedures in sandstorms and darkness. But after losing his own wife in a hospital that reacted too slowly to her internal injuries, Daniel left everything behind. He wanted a simple job, a quiet life, no more life-or-death decisions. Until now. Ethan's jaw tightened, pride battled fear. "My wife is up there," he said, "if you're wrong." If I'm wrong, we lose nothing, Daniel interrupted. If I'm right, we lose everything. For the first time in his career, Ethan Blackwell had no control. He nodded. Take me. They ran. Security followed behind, but Daniel was faster. His body remembered what his mind had tried to forget. When they reached the penthouse, the door hung open. Inside, glass shattered across the floor. Grace lay near the coffee table, unconscious, blood staining her blouse. Her breathing was shallow and uneven. Ethan dropped to his knees. Grace, Grace. Daniel moved with calm precision. Sir, I need space, he said. Ethan hesitated. Daniel's voice sharpened. Now. The CEO backed away. Daniel checked her airway, her pulse, the angle of impact. His fingers pressed along her abdomen gently. She flinched slightly. Internal bleeding, likely splenic injury. He turned to security. Call an ambulance and tell them we have suspected abdominal trauma with respiratory distress. They need a trauma team ready. He removed his belt, using it to apply firm pressure and stabilize her position. He adjusted her airway, ensuring she could breathe without obstruction. Grace, he said softly, stay with me, you're not done yet. Lily stood frozen in the doorway until Daniel glanced at her. She's fighting, he told the little girl. Your mom is strong. Minutes felt like hours. Ethan knelt beside them, helpless for the first time in his adult life. You saved people before, he asked quietly. Daniel didn't look up. I tried. The ambulance sirens finally pierced the air. Paramedics rushed in, and one of them paused. Who stabilized her? The medic asked, impressed at the positioning and bleeding control. Daniel stepped back. Just did what I could. The paramedic nodded. You probably saved her life. Ethan closed his eyes. The hospital hours were brutal. Surgery confirmed Daniel's suspicion. Internal bleeding from a ruptured spleen. Another hour without intervention and Grace would have gone into irreversible shock. Ethan sat in the waiting room, staring at his hands. Across from him, Daniel sat quietly, still in his janitor uniform. For years, Ethan had walked past him without a second glance. Now that same man had held his wife's life in his hands. When the surgeon finally emerged and said, "She's stable," Ethan felt something inside him break and rebuild at the same time. He stood slowly. Daniel, he said, voice thick, I owe you everything. Daniel shook his head. You owe your daughter she knew who to run to. Those words hit differently. Lily hadn't run to power. She had run to kindness. Weeks later, Grace returned home, weak but alive. The attackers were caught. The company's security protocols were overhauled. But the biggest change happened in Ethan. At the next company-wide meeting, Ethan stood at the podium. For years, he began, I believed leadership was about control, about authority, about being the smartest man in the room. He looked toward the back. Daniel stood near the wall, uncomfortable in a borrowed suit. I was wrong, Ethan continued. Leadership is about character, and I overlooked the greatest example of it in this building. He called Daniel to the stage. Applause filled the room, hesitant at first, then thunderous. Ethan announced a new executive role, Director of Corporate Safety and Emergency Preparedness. For Daniel. You see what others miss, Ethan said quietly to him. That's the kind of man I want protecting this company. Daniel hesitated. I'm just a janitor, he said softly. Ethan smiled. No, he replied, you're a hero who chose humility. Months later, Lily walked into the lobby holding her mother's hand. She spotted Daniel immediately. But this time, he wasn't holding a mop. He was reviewing safety plans with department heads. She ran to him anyway. Hi, Mr. Daniel, she said proudly. Mom says you're the bravest man she knows. Daniel knelt to her level. Your mom is braver, he said, and you were the bravest of all. Because in a moment of terror, she chose the right person. Not the richest, not the most powerful, but the most human. And that choice saved a life. The glass building still shined in the sun, deals were still made, profits still rose. But something deeper had changed. A CEO learned humility. A janitor reclaimed his purpose. A little girl proved that kindness is the strongest compass in the world. And everyone who witnessed that day understood one unforgettable truth. You never know the strength hidden behind ordinary uniforms. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one who can save everything.